Have you ever seen a person standing on the edge of life and death, and the only thing holding them back wasn't strength, but a hand reaching out at the right moment? Caroline Brooks once thought her life was over, when her painful and violent past pushed her into the darkest corner of the American West. But in the moment when she thought she had lost everything, a man appeared, knelt quietly beside her and said, "You said it hurt, so I'm here." But would a person who has suffered so much damage like Caroline dare to choose to stand up again? Would a man who has lost all love like John Calder dare to bet his heart once more? And if it were you, between pain and a strange hand trying to save you, what would you choose? Today's story is not just about love, but about redemption, about the courage to believe in others one last time in life. If you believe that everyone deserves a place to return to, stay with us. Before starting the story, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the journeys that touch your heart. The wind had been rising all afternoon across the upper ridges of Silver Ridge, and by nightfall it carried the sharp sting of winter on its breath. Snow blew sideways in restless sheets, drifting across the narrow trail like a white tide rolling back and forth across the mountainside. It was the kind of cold that slipped through wool coats and flannel shirts, the kind that normally kept even the hardiest cowboys indoors. But on that night, someone was running. A woman, small-framed, bundled in a tan wool coat that had once been sturdy but was now torn along the side, stumbled through snow nearly 2 feet deep. Her boots sank with every step, and her breath came out in broken clouds that vanished into the dark. A hand pressed tightly against her side, warm blood seeping through her fingers and melting the snow wherever it fell. There was fear in her eyes, but there was something else too, a tired kind of determination, the sort that only appears when a person has run farther than they ever believed they could. Her name was Caroline Brooks, though at that moment she wasn't thinking about her name. She was thinking only about staying upright. Every time she faltered, the memory of boot steps behind her, the heavy, confident stride of men who believed she was as good as dead, forced her to push forward. Somewhere down the ridge, a gunshot cracked through the trees. The sound rolled across the mountains like a warning from the earth itself. Caroline froze. Then she tried to run again. Her foot snagged on a buried rock. She pitched forward into the snow, hands sinking into the freezing powder. Pain flared sharp and hot through her side. She gasped, the cold stealing the breath from her lungs. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. The world blurred around her, spinning in dizzy circles of white and shadow. "It hurts. It hurts too much," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to the sky or to God or to no one at all. The wind carried her words away. For a moment, she lay still. It would be so easy to give up here, so easy to let the snow swallow her whole. She had been running for nearly 3 miles, in boots not meant for climbing, with a bullet lodged beneath her ribs. She had lost too much blood already. Even if she survived the night, she doubted she could survive another chase. A dark shape moved in the swirling snow. Hoofbeats, slow, steady. Not the hurried thunder of the men behind her. Caroline tried to rise. Half terrified, it was one of them who had somehow circled ahead. But her body refused to move. She could barely lift her head, the cold numbing her fingers and toes. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she watched the figure approach. A horse, a tall sorrel gelding, emerged first, its breath steaming in the frigid air. Then the rider came into view. He wore a long, weather-worn duster that brushed against the stirrups, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his brow, and a thick gray scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. Snow clung to his shoulders, melting slowly from the heat of his body. When he dismounted, it was with a slowness that spoke not of caution, but of years that had carved patience into his bones and steadiness into his hands. He wasn't young. Maybe in his mid-50s. with the kind of face that carried the quiet strength of a man who had lived far more life than he cared to explain. His beard was kept short, touched with silver at the chin and jaw. His boots were scuffed, his gloves mended more than once. But there was dignity in his appearance, a simple, timeless dignity that belonged to the old American West. He kneeled slowly beside her, boots crunching against the frozen ground. "You're hurt," he said, voice low and steady as a stone in a riverbed. Caroline tried to pull away, though there was nowhere to go. "Please, just leave me. They're coming back." "You don't." He shook his head gently. "Ma'am, I ain't leaving you out here." Her vision blurred. "It hurts too much." He shifted closer, planting one knee in the snow beside her. His gloved hand hovered near her side, careful not to startle her. "That's why I'm here," he murmured, with a softness she had not expected from a stranger. "So you don't face it alone." The simple sincerity of the words cracked something inside her. She felt tears spill down her cheeks, not from pain, but from the weight of being noticed, the weight of not being abandoned. For months she had lived inside silence and suspicion, carrying fears too heavy for one heart. To hear someone speak to her with gentleness, it was enough to make her tremble. The man studied her wound briefly, frowning with concern but not alarm. "Name's John Calder," he said. "My cabin's about 2 miles west. I can get you there if you let me. Ain't safe being out in this weather, much less with whoever's trailing behind you." Caroline swallowed hard. "They'll kill you. If they see you with me." John gave a faint, almost tired smile. "Ma'am, I've lived long enough to know a man doesn't hide from danger, not when someone needs help." He slipped his arms beneath her carefully, lifting her as though she weighed no more than a small sack of grain. She cried out softly at the movement, her grip tightening around his coat sleeve. John steadied her with a quiet word meant to anchor more than soothe. "I've got you," he said. He carried her to his horse with slow, sure steps, protecting her from the wind with the angle of his body. Once there, he mounted with practiced ease, settling her carefully in front of him, his coat wrapped around her like a blanket, blocking out the worst of the bitter air. "Stay with me," he murmured near her ear. "Just keep your eyes open long as you can." She tried, but the warmth of his coat, the steady beat of his heart against her back, and the rhythmic sway of the horse lulled her toward unconsciousness. She fought it at first, worried she'd fall or slip, but John held her securely. One arm braced around her as the other guided the reins. Snow whipped at them, the world reduced to white and shadow. But John knew the mountain trails with the instinct of someone who had ridden them for 20 years. He kept the horse at a controlled pace, not too fast to jostle her wound, not too slow to risk being caught. After several minutes, Caroline forced her eyes open. Why are you helping me?" John didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet, almost reflective. "Because nights like this," he said, "every soul deserves a fighting chance." Caroline's head rested against his shoulder. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "You're hurt, you're scared, and you're running from someone who thinks fear's a weapon. Folks like that, I don't abide 'em." The wind howled across the ridge, but something inside Caroline eased just a little. She didn't know this man. She didn't know if she'd live long enough to thank him, but in that moment, wrapped in his coat, she felt the faintest hint of safety for the first time in what felt like years. A warm lantern glow appeared ahead through the storm. Her last conscious thought before darkness finally claimed her was that she had never seen a more welcome light, and that maybe she wasn't as alone as she had believed. The warmth inside John Calder's cabin did not strike Caroline at first. Her mind hovered somewhere between drifting snow and the echo of boot steps that had chased her along the ridge. When she finally regained enough sense to notice the room, her eyes opened to a blur of timbered walls. the glow of a single oil lamp, and the steady crackle from a small wood stove. She lay on a cot near the hearth, wrapped in a thick blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and pine resin. A low groan escaped her before she made sense of the pain in her side. The movement pulled at her wound, sharp enough to bring tears to the corners of her eyes. She drew a slow breath and tried to gather herself. A chair scraped softly across the floorboards. John stepped into her view carrying a pot of water that steamed gently. He had removed his duster and hat, leaving him in a flannel shirt and a pair of worn suspenders. Snow still clung to the fringe of his beard. His movements were careful, almost quiet enough to blend with the breathing of the cabin itself. He set the pot beneath the light and glanced toward her. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. A fragile recognition of two people who had been strangers an hour ago yet were bound by the circumstances of a single night. She licked her lips, voice hoarse. "Am I safe here?" John did not answer right away. He poured warm water into a basin and prepared clean cloths, each motion steady and functional. Only once he had organized his supplies did he turn toward her. "You are," he said, pulling a stool beside the cot. "I checked the trail for tracks after bringing you inside. Looks like no one followed us this far." His tone was quiet, firm, and without dramatics. Caroline nodded slowly. Even that small gesture made her dizzy. She closed her eyes for a moment. "Can you let me see your side?" he asked gently. Though the thought unsettled her, she could not refuse. She pushed the blanket aside a little. He helped her shift her coat enough to reveal the blood-soaked cloth beneath. His breath tightened almost imperceptibly. "That bullet went in deep," he murmured. "But it did not strike anything that'll kill you quick." He paused, searching her face for permission. "I can clean it. I've patched worse." "Were you a doctor?" she whispered. "No, just a man who's seen too much fightin'." He dipped a cloth in warm water. "This'll sting." It stung more than she imagined. Her fingers gripped the edge of the cot, knuckles pale. She tried to focus on the details around her so the pain would not swallow her whole. The worn pine boards under her hand, the faint ripple of flame in the lamp glass, John's boots braced against the floor, worn smooth at the heels from far too many years in the saddle. He worked methodically, using what supplies he had. The quiet between them grew fuller as she listened to his breath and the soft sound of water dripping from the cloth. When he pressed near the wound, she gasped sharply. Her shoulders trembled. "It hurts too much," she whispered before she could stop herself. John rested his hand near her ribs, not touching the wound this time, just letting the weight of his presence steady her. "I know," he said, "but you're not alone in it." The words washed over her in a way she had not expected. Something in his voice, deep and patient, broke through a layer of fear she had been carrying for years. She blinked hard to clear her vision. When he finished cleaning the wound, he wrapped clean bandages around her torso. His fingers were surprisingly gentle. Once done, he sat back slightly, studying her face. "You've lost blood. You'll need rest. You should drink something." He stepped to the stove and ladled a cup of hot water with a pinch of dried herbs. "This will warm you." She accepted it with trembling hands. The steam fogged her vision briefly. Sip by sip, warmth spread through her chest. Only when she had taken several mouthfuls did she attempt to speak again. "Those men, they're not going to stop. I need to keep moving." His gaze rested on her, steady but not demanding. "What exactly are they after?" Caroline swallowed hard. She had been running so long that the question startled her. She felt suddenly exposed, not just physically but in the way a truth can feel like too much to share with anyone. She kept her eyes on the cup in her hands. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see," she said quietly. something that ties powerful men to the Red Mesa gang. They'll do anything to keep it from getting out. John watched her closely. Who's involved? A sheriff. She hesitated. Mason Harlow, of Dry Creek. The way John straightened told her he recognized the name. A muscle in his jaw shifted as if remembering something he wished could be forgotten. "I see," he said. She took another breath, pulling the blanket closer around her shoulders. She felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the storm outside. If they know I'm alive, they'll come. They always come. John was silent for a moment. The cabin held the quiet like a living thing. "You've been running a long time," he said gently. "A lifetime," she whispered. He pulled the stool closer again. Not too close, but close enough that she could sense the warmth from him. "I can help you. At least until you're strong enough to walk without bleeding." "You don't even know who I am," she replied. "I don't need your history to know you're someone who deserves better than dying alone in a storm." His gaze softened. "And I don't mind a bit of trouble if it means doing what's right." Her throat tightened. She looked down because looking at him felt too raw, too much like being seen fully. Silence enveloped the cabin again, though this silence felt different. Before, it had been filled with uncertainty and fear. Now it carried something steadier, almost comforting. She finally dared to ask, "Why are you out here alone? Why a cabin so far from folks?" John leaned back slightly, the light outlining the lines on his face. He did not answer at once. The pause was not avoidance. It was the pause of someone who rarely spoke of himself and did not do so lightly. "Life has a way of pushing a man up a mountain when he's got nowhere else left to go," he said quietly. "Some folks carry their years in their backs. I carry mine in the places I choose to stay away from." Caroline sensed the weight behind those words. A loss, perhaps. A wound buried deeper than hers. He stood and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "You should rest. Sleep if you can. I'll keep a watch near the window." She nodded. The cabin grew softer around her as she lay down again. Through half-closed eyes, she watched him return to the chair near the window, one hand resting on the butt of a revolver holstered at his hip, the other braced on the windowsill where a thin layer of frost crept along the glass. Despite everything she had endured, she felt herself drifting into a safer kind of darkness. There was something reassuring in the quiet presence of a man who did not ask for trust but somehow earned it in the space of an hour. Long after her breathing settled, John remained awake, eyes narrowed on the faint outline of the trail beyond the cabin. The snow had slowed, though the wind still brushed against the roof with a low, mournful sound. His thoughts moved as slowly as the lamplight. He sensed trouble would return to his doorstep, the kind of trouble he had sworn to leave behind, but sitting there in the dim cabin, listening to the fragile rhythm of a wounded woman's breath, he knew he could not turn away. The world outside was wide and cold. Inside, there was warmth, and in that warmth, a purpose he had not felt in years stirred again. He glanced once more toward the cot. Caroline slept curled beneath the blanket, one hand resting lightly over her bandaged side. The tension in her face had eased. She looked weary, but no longer consumed by fear. John reached for another piece of wood and placed it gently inside the stove. The flames brightened, casting a deeper glow across the room. As the fire settled, he whispered into the quiet, as if speaking to truths he had kept locked away. "Some things deserve protectin'." He stayed beside the window the rest of the night. A faint tapping reached Caroline Brooks before anything else. She had drifted in and out of uneasy rest, her mind slipping between fevered memories and the steady glow of the lamp beside her. Her eyelids felt heavy, yet something pulled her toward waking. The tapping returned, this time sharper, not in the room, not beside her, but on the wooden porch boards just outside the cabin. John Calder's silhouette shifted near the window. He had not slept. His posture alone made that clear. He had remained in the same seat, close to the frost-laced glass, long after midnight. The lamplight caught the straight line of his shoulders and the slow measured breath of a man who had kept too many vigils in his lifetime. Caroline stirred. "Did you hear that?" "Yes." John rose from the chair without haste, his boots quiet against the floor. "Stay where you are." Her fingers tightened around the blanket. She knew enough danger to read the edge in his voice. She lifted herself slightly, swallowing back the rush of dizziness. Through the small window beside her cot, she saw nothing but the dark shapes of pines pressed close to the cabin. John reached for the rifle resting beside the door. He held it with the confidence of someone who did not need to brandish a weapon to make it persuasive. His hand paused on the latch. "What if it's them?" she whispered. "We're about to find out." He opened the door only a fraction. Cold air swept into the room. Snow drifted inside like a thin breath of white. A lantern glowed outside, held aloft by a man bundled in a long coat. Behind him stood two figures, shadows more than shapes. The lantern raised slightly, and the face behind it came into view broad cheekbones, graying beard, eyes the muted blue of faded denim. "Evenin'?" "John." The voice was familiar in a way that made Caroline's pulse jump. John lowered the rifle a little, though his grip stayed ready. "Mason Harlow. Didn't expect you on this ridge." The sheriff of Dry Creek stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. He spoke with an ease that carried years of authority but none of the warmth one might expect from an old acquaintance. "Your lantern was burnin'. Figured someone might need help." His gaze slid past John toward the dim interior. "You've got company." Caroline instinctively pulled the blanket tighter, though she sensed it was too late to pretend she was not there. Mason's eyes, sharp with practiced awareness, had already caught the faint movement on the cot. John shifted his weight slightly, blocking Mason's line of sight. "Found her on the ridge. She's hurt." Mason lifted an eyebrow. "So I see. Mind if I step in?" The subtle tension in the air grew denser, like the hush before a storm. John did not move aside. "You can come inside," he said calmly, "but you stay near the door." Mason gave a short laugh, still cautious as ever. He lowered the lantern and stepped into the cabin. The two deputies behind him chose to wait outside, their silhouettes lingering like silent question marks. The sheriff scanned the room with a deliberate pace. His eyes settled on Caroline. She felt a chill crawl up her spine despite the warmth of the fire. "You're a long way from Dry Creek, miss." Caroline's voice was thin. "I had no choice." "Strange thing," Mason replied. "Folks usually head toward town when they're in trouble. Not away from it." John moved closer, folding his arms over his chest. "She's not in any shape to be questioned." Mason looked at him with a kind of smiling suspicion. Questioned. Now why would she need questioning? He stepped around John slowly, the way a wolf might circle a fence post. His eyes returned to Caroline. "You know, there are people looking for you. Folks say you disappeared. Folks say you ran." Caroline's breath caught. Mason's smile deepened, satisfied by the reaction he had stirred. "Easy," John said. His voice cut through the room with a controlled calmness. "She's under my roof." "That she is." The sheriff's tone held an inflection that meant more than the words. He took another casual step. "What exactly happened to her?" Caroline stared at the sheriff. The memory of her husband's last moments flickered behind her eyes, the whisper of a warning he never had time to finish. She felt her pulse thudding unevenly under her ribs. "I was shot near the ridge," she said quietly. Mason tilted his head. "By who?" She hesitated. John watched her, silent yet steady, as if reminding her she did not have to face this man alone. "Men from Red Mesa," she said. Mason nodded slowly. "Red Mesa gang. Nasty bunch." His gaze sharpened. "Funny thing, though, they don't usually come this far north unless they're hunting something specific." Caroline held his stare. She saw something in his expression now, something that made the skin on her arms prickle. Knowledge, recognition, calculation. John stepped between them again, creating a barrier. "I'll take her to Dry Creek once she's healed." Mason considered him, unreadable for a moment. "You, of all people, bringing someone back to town." He smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. "Never thought I'd see that day." John did not respond. Mason seemed to lose interest in pressing further. He wiped melting snow from his mustache, glanced around the cabin one last time, then walked toward the door. "Storm's letting up," he said as he stepped outside. "Roads'll be clear enough by tomorrow. I'll expect to see the two of you in town soon." John placed his hand on the doorframe, stopping him. "What business do you have up here at this hour?" Mason gave a small shrug. "Just making sure there's no trouble on my mountain." "Your mountain," John echoed. Mason leaned in slightly. "Everything around Dry Creek is my concern, even this ridge." He tapped the doorframe lightly with a gloved finger. "Keep her comfortable, but don't keep her hidden." His boots crunched away from the porch. The deputies followed, and within moments, all three men were swallowed by the line of pines. When John closed the door, the silence in the cabin felt heavier than before. Caroline sat upright, her breath shaking. "He knows," she whispered. John set the rifle aside and moved to her. "He suspects." "That's all?" "That's enough," she said. "He's working with them." John looked down at her, the firelight reflecting in his steady brown eyes. "Tell me what you saw." "Caroline." She pressed a hand to her forehead, gathering fragments of memory. "I heard Mason speaking with Elias Ward. They were near the back of the bank. Mason told him the ledger would be burned before sunrise and that no one could trace the money." John froze. Caroline continued, voice trembling. "But Elias said there was a problem. He said someone saw them. Someone overheard." She paused long enough for her throat to tighten. "That someone was me." John looked away, not in doubt, not in frustration, but in recognition, as though the final piece of a long, unfinished puzzle had been placed before him. He reached for another log and placed it gently on the fire. The flames brightened. Shadows stretched across the walls like long fingers. "I had a feelin' trouble was tied to the men running this county," John said quietly. "But Mason working with Elias, that's a bad knot of rope." Caroline hugged the blanket close. "He'll kill me if he finds me." John returned to the cot and sat at its edge. His voice was low. "He won't." "How can you know?" "Because I've seen men like Mason. I've seen what fear looks like on their kind. They hide behind badges and friends with guns. They walk big because they know their hearts are small." He studied her face. "I've dealt with men like that before." "You've dealt with Elias," she said softly. His shoulders stiffened, though his eyes stayed steady. "Yes." He said nothing more. The room fell into a reflective stillness. Caroline felt her body relax despite the fear that still clawed at her. Something about the way John spoke carried weight and certainty, like someone who had already faced deeper scars than the one on her side. She let her head rest against the pillow. "Thank you for keeping him away from me." John adjusted the blanket one last time. "Get some rest. We'll figure our next step when you're stronger." Caroline closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her down again. The last thing she heard was the quiet scrape of John's chair returning to its place near the window. Outside, the trail leading to Dry Creek lay silent beneath untouched snow. But beneath that silence simmered the first hint of danger that was no longer distant. no longer faceless. For the first time in 10 long years, the past had found John Calder. Caroline drifted in an uneasy sleep long after Sheriff Mason Harlow's departure. Each time she surfaced toward waking, she felt the echo of fear before memory settled into place. Inside the cabin's small room, the fire glowed softly, breathing light into the shadows. She listened to the hush of burning embers, a sound steady enough to steady her own breath. John Calder remained close, folding firewood, checking the latch on the door, walking back to the window each time something outside caught his attention. He moved with a calm quietness that made the space feel steadier. The presence of another human being felt both strange and comforting to Caroline. Her years had taught her to endure alone. Her weeks on the run had carved that lesson deeper. Yet here she was, depending on a man she'd known barely a day. Her voice reached him across the stillness. "How long was I asleep?" He looked over from the window, long enough to let your body get its bearings. She pushed herself upright. Pain rippled through her side, but her mind felt clearer. The bandage wrapped around her ribs tugged slightly as she inhaled. "Did Mason say anything else after I fell asleep?" she asked. "No." He left without lingering. John poured warm water into a tin cup and handed it to her, but his eyes were calculating. He knows more than he let on. Caroline wrapped her hands around the cup, absorbing the heat. He always does. That's how he keeps control. John sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "Why didn't you tell someone before things got this far?" She considered the question. People in power can twist truth however they want. Mason holds the badge. Elias holds the money. Anyone I told would ask where I got the information. They'd ask why I was near the back of the bank in the first place. They'd ask questions until the truth no longer mattered. John nodded slowly. "You've had to fight this alone." "Most people do," she replied softly. "Not everyone gets someone who shows up at the right moment." A quiet passed between them. John's eyes held a depth she had noticed before, a depth that spoke of losses buried beneath years of hard living. She felt that same quiet reflected inside herself, the kind that came only after a person had lost too much to name. John eventually rose and moved to the stove. "You need food, something warm." He ladled a small portion of stew into a bowl. She watched him set it beside her, noticing the way fatigue lined his posture though he did not admit it. As she ate, he adjusted the fire, checked the rifle again, and studied the snow piling against the window. "You should rest," she said. "I will," he replied, though he didn't sit. "Not just yet." "Why not?" "Because a man like Mason doesn't climb this ridge unless he's hunting something." His timing was too perfect. John paused, lowering his voice. "Someone may have seen us tonight." Caroline held still, spoon halfway to her mouth. "You think they followed my tracks? They might have lost you in the storm. But once Mason arrived, the game changed." She set the bowl aside and pressed her fingers to her temples. "If I hadn't shown up here, you wouldn't be in danger." "I've lived in danger before," he said. "I know what it looks like. This isn't new to me." She lifted her gaze. "That's what worries me." John's eyes softened. "You surviving is worth every bit of trouble you brought with you." Her breath stalled. She did not know how to answer a thing said with such quiet conviction. He noticed her struggle and stepped away to give her space. The room settled again, almost peaceful if not for the weight lingering in the air. A moment later, a faint sound outside cut the air. Not a knock, not the creak of a tree. Something heavier. Snow shifting under deliberate footsteps. Caroline froze. John's head turned quickly toward the door. His hand moved to the rifle. "Stay behind me," he whispered, before she could argue. He stepped toward the door, his body angled as if bracing for whatever waited outside. Caroline gripped the edge of the cot. Her heart pounded so loudly she barely heard the next sound. A voice called from beyond the porch. John Calder. Need a word. John's shoulders lowered a degree, though not enough to signal relief. Thomas Grady, he muttered. Caroline blinked. Who is that? Neighbor. Rancher. Good man when he isn't riled. John opened the door part way. Cold wind stirred the lamplight. Everything all right? Thomas. Thomas stood near the porch, holding a small lantern low to the ground. His heavy coat looked dusted with snow, and his expression carried concern. Had a couple of riders crossing the creek below my pasture, Thomas said. Didn't look familiar. Figured I'd check on you. Appreciated. John replied. Thomas stepped closer. Whoever they weren't taking care to hide their tracks. Looked like they came from the direction of Dry Creek. Caroline felt the words like a tightening rope around her ribs. John noticed and lowered his voice. You see how many? 2, Thomas said, ridden quick but cautious. Could be nothing. His gaze drifted toward the window and the faint outline of Caroline inside. His brow furrowed. You've got company. John nodded. She's hurt. Found her on the ridge. Thomas studied him. Trouble find you again. Not yet, John said. Thomas inhaled through his nose, reading more between the lines than John spoke aloud. You need anything. Just keep your eyes open. Thomas inclined his head. You got it. He stepped back toward his horse. I'll ride the line. If those men circle up this ridge, I'll know. John watched him depart until the lantern disappeared behind the trees, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the night. He closed the door firmly. When he turned around, Caroline saw something shift in his expression, something heavier than worry. You trust him? She asked. I do. Then why do you look like you've just heard the worst? John placed the rifle on the table. Because Thomas doesn't warn a man unless he sees a threat. If riders came from Dry Creek, Mason sent them. Caroline shivered. He won't let me live. Not if he thinks I'll talk. John walked toward her, stopping just close enough that she felt anchored by his presence. Caroline, listen to me. I won't let him near you. You're under my roof now. I'll keep you safe. She tried to believe him. In his voice she heard something she did not hear in the voices of other men. Not a promise meant to impress. A vow forged from something older, something steady. Still, fear tangled in her chest. John, what if keeping me safe costs you too much? He lowered himself to sit beside her cot. Loss doesn't scare me anymore. Her breath hitched. What does... John looked into the fire before answering. Losing the chance to fix what's been wrong in this valley for years. She studied him, sensing a deeper story behind his words. She placed her hand on the edge of the blanket, fingers gripping the wool. You've seen dark things too, she said. Yes. Did it happen here? Some of it. His voice dimmed. Some before I came. She leaned forward, her strength returning slowly. Why did you choose this place? John hesitated. The truth in him moved like an old wound being touched for the first time in years. This ridge offered quiet, he said, and quiet is a place where a man can hear himself think, or remember. His gaze dropped. My wife was from Dry Creek. We lived near the edge of town. Years back, a group of men came through looking to make a point. His jaw tightened slightly. They made it on my family. Caroline's heart fell. John. He shook his head gently. There's no mending the past, only living with what's left. She reached out, fingers brushing his hand lightly. She did not know if it was comfort or gratitude or an instinctive gesture toward another wounded soul. He did not pull away. The fire crackled softly beside them. Snow pressed against the cabin walls. For a brief moment, Caroline felt the fear lift just enough for her to taste a small flicker of strength. "What happens now?" she asked. John took her hand fully, holding it with a quiet steadiness. "Now," he said, "we stop running. We plan. And we make sure Mason Harlow never hurts another soul." Her breath steadied. For the first time since she fled Dry Creek, she felt herself exhale without dread. She believed him. She trusted him. And the weight she had carried alone began, piece by piece, to shift. The night settled over the cabin with a kind of heavy stillness, the kind that made every sound outside seem closer than it truly was. Snow layered itself upright along the window, clinging to the glass in quiet patterns. A faint glow from the stove spread across the floorboards, softening the edges of the small room. Caroline Brooks lay propped against a pillow, her breath calmer than it had been earlier. Pain still tugged at her side, but she had managed to rest. Not sleep exactly. Something gentler than fear, but sharper than comfort. Her eyes followed the slow rise and fall of the flames. Across the room, John Calder sharpened a knife beside the table. He worked the blade along a whetstone in steady motions, letting the sound echo in the silence. Metal over stone. A whisper that sent a small tremor up Caroline's back. "You expecting trouble tonight?" she asked quietly. John did not look up. "Not expecting," he said. "Preparing." She watched the concentration on his face. "Does this bring back old memories?" "Some." He replied. "Enough to remind me how fast things can turn." The fire popped, scattering small sparks against the iron grate. Caroline pulled the blanket closer. "I should have stayed away. I brought danger straight to your door." John finally raised his eyes. The expression he wore was not anger or regret. It was something steadier, rooted deep within a long life of surviving storms. Trouble finds every man sooner or later. You just arrived at the same time mine did. Caroline's fingers twisted into the blanket. "If Mason and Elias are coming, they won't walk up and knock. They'll burn this place down to get to me." "They'll have to get through me first," John said. Her breath caught. "That's what I'm afraid of." He set the knife aside and pulled the chair beside her cot. "Tell me exactly what you heard behind the bank." She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering memory like scattered papers in a wind. Elias told Mason the ledger showed payments funneled from the county's land budget. They planned to sell parcels twice, pocketing the difference. Red Mesa moved the money across the border. She inhaled slowly. But the ledger wasn't burned yet. Elias wanted Mason to handle it himself. John frowned. If that ledger still exists, it could bury all of them. "That's why they're hunting me," she whispered. "That ledger is your way out," John said, "but only if we can find it." Caroline leaned her head back against the wall, exhaling shakily. "Dry Creek is crawling with Mason's men. I can't walk into town. You won't have to," John replied. "I can go." Caroline sat upright. "No. He knows you helped me. If you appear in town, he'll get suspicious. He'll try to pin everything on you. I've dealt with suspicion before." She shook her head. "Not like this. Mason twists anything he touches." John shifted his weight, resting his elbows on his knees. "I know him better than you think, Caroline." She studied him. His tone carried something deeper than familiarity. "Did you know him from your past?" John hesitated. Not long, but enough for Caroline to sense the truth beneath the quiet. "He was deputy back when my wife was alive," John said softly. A smooth talker even then. Always knew which side of a man to appeal to. Folks liked him because he told them what they wanted to hear. "What happened?" she asked gently. John's gaze lowered. "A group of rustlers came through, tried to steal our horses. My wife ran outside when she heard the shouting. One of the men shoved her, Hard. She fell, struck her head. His breath tightened. I told Mason her death wasn't an accident. I begged him to track the men down. Caroline listened without interruption. He told me to let it go. John continued, said the rustlers were long gone, said I needed to accept what God allowed. A shadow deepened in his eyes. Weeks later, I learned those same men had been seen near Dry Creek. Mason never pursued them. Why? She whispered. Rumors said he got paid to look the other way. Caroline pressed a hand to her mouth. I'm so sorry. John shook his head slowly. There's no mending old wounds. But I won't let him cut new ones. A long silence grew between them, not cold, heavy with shared understanding. Caroline spoke again with newfound resolve. Then we need a plan. One that gets us to that ledger without giving Mason the chance to strike first. John nodded. Thomas Grady will be watching the ridge. That buys us some time. I know a trail that curves behind Dry Creek, one most folks forget even exists. If we travel that way, we can reach the back of town unseen. Caroline hesitated. John, I'm not strong enough for that. I can barely stand. He met her gaze. You won't need to walk. I'll take the wagon. Slow and steady. You can lie down in the back. She shook her head. If Mason catches us on the road, you'll die for helping me. Let him try. Don't say that, she whispered. Fear pushed through her voice. I can't bear the thought of being the reason someone else. Her voice cracked. Someone else gets hurt because of me. John reached across the blanket and touched her wrist gently. You didn't bring pain to my door. Pain was already sitting on my porch long before you arrived. You just gave it a name. She closed her eyes as a tear slipped free. He didn't look away. He didn't rush to wipe it. He simply let her feel it. After a moment, she steadied her breath. When do we leave? At first chance, John said. Storm will calm by morning. Tracks will be easier to read. Caroline inhaled. Tell me the plan you have in your mind. John stood and walked to the small table. He unrolled a rough map, edges curled from years of use, and smoothed it under his palm. There's an old feed mill on the north edge of Dry Creek, he said. Most folks avoid it. Too many stray dogs, too much dust. But there's a back gate that leads behind the county office. If the ledger's still in Mason's possession, it'll be locked in the back room there. Caroline slid a little closer. How do you know that? I used to ride with the county men, John said. Long time ago. I've been in that office enough times to know its corners better than Mason ever will. Caroline leaned over the map. If you can get inside, I can tell you exactly where to look. I saw Elias hand Mason a brass key. Small, like the kind that opens a private drawer. John nodded. That drawer will be where he keeps the ledger. Then we need the key, Caroline said. They stared at each other. The truth hovered unspoken. She finished the thought. Which means we need to get close to him. John's jaw relaxed, though his eyes hardened with purpose. We will. Caroline let out a long, steady breath. You're risking everything. So are you, he said quietly. The fire dimmed. John added another log. Its glow filled the room again, pushing back the cold. The flames wrapped the cabin in warmth, but a sharp unease lingered under the surface. Caroline watched his silhouette by the stove and felt an emotion she had not expected. Safety. Not because the world outside had grown less dangerous, but because she was no longer facing it alone. John returned to her cot and sat again. His voice dipped low, as though the truth needed softness to fit inside the space. Caroline, he said, when we ride to Dry Creek, I want you to know something. What is it? I'm not doing this out of pity. He held her eyes. I'm doing it because the world has enough men like Mason Harlow. It could use more fights that mean something. Her breath trembled. You make it sound like I'm worth fighting for. You are. A fragile quiet settled, the kind that revealed more than it concealed. Caroline lowered her gaze. I haven't felt worth much in a long time. John's voice warmed. Then let me help you remember. Snow shifted outside, brushing against the walls in a long whisper. Caroline closed her eyes briefly, letting the moment sink deep. She opened them again and spoke with a calm she hadn't felt since the night she fled Dry Creek. When we go, she said, I won't run any more. John nodded. Good, because neither will I. The hours before dawn slipped by without rest for either of them. The fire dimmed to a steady glow, painting the cabin walls in warm strokes of amber. Caroline Brooks lay awake, watching the shadows shift as the flame breathed. Her body ached, yet her mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. Pain had a way of sharpening the senses, but purpose did something deeper. It anchored her. At the table, John Calder tightened the straps on his saddlebag with practiced hands. A coil of rope rested near his chair, along with a lantern he had repaired twice during the night. Every motion carried intention. He moved with the quiet certainty of someone preparing for a path he had walked before, though in a different life. Caroline studied him in silence. The way his shoulders squared when he concentrated. The way he checked each piece of gear not once, but twice. She wondered how many rides like this he had taken in his youth, how many dangers he had met on trails winding through lonely terrain. John, she finally said, are you sure we're ready for this? He looked up, one brow lifting with a mild gentleness she had begun to recognize. It's not about being ready. It's about knowing. It's time. She lowered her gaze. I'm afraid of what will happen in town. You're allowed to be afraid, he replied. But fear doesn't decide what comes next. You do. Caroline let that settle inside her. She had spent years adjusting herself to the choices of others, shrinking her voice to fit inside the quiet corners of her life. John's words stirred something long buried. He walked to her cot and crouched beside her, checking the bandage with careful fingers. You can sit up better today. It hurts, she said. I know. She smiled weakly. You always say that like it's a promise. Maybe it is. A soft wind pushed against the cabin walls. John moved to the window and studied the faint silhouette of pines against the pale sky. Storm passed, he said. Trees are still. Snow's settled. We leave soon. Caroline braced her hands on the cot and pushed herself upright. Her breath hitched, but she fought through the pain. I can walk to the wagon. You don't need to. I want to. John held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. I'll help you. He slipped an arm behind her back and another beneath her knees, lifting her gently. She drew a small breath at the effort, but did not protest. He lowered her to her feet with care, steadying her until her legs found balance. Take your time, he murmured. I'm all right. She leaned on him as they reached the door. Outside, the world felt strangely purified. Snow lay smooth and pale across the ridge. The trees stood like quiet sentinels, their branches bowed beneath a fresh white covering. The air felt crisp, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone. John guided her to the wagon parked beside the porch. He had lined the bed with heavy blankets and a thick canvas sheet. She climbed in with measured breaths, settling herself against a cushion of folded burlap. When he finished tightening the straps and checking the harness on the bay horse, he climbed onto the seat and looked back. Ready. As ready as I'll ever be. The wagon lurched softly as the horse stepped forward. The wheels crunched through the snow, leaving a narrow trail behind them. Caroline watched the cabin fade from view, feeling a surprising tug of attachment. That place saved me, she whispered. John's voice carried over his shoulder. Sometimes a place is just timber and nails. What saved you was choosing to keep breathing. Caroline rested her head back. Not alone. The journey carried them through a stretch of tall pines. Snow clung to every branch, bending them toward the earth. The forest hushed the world like a blanket muffling sound. Even the horses' steps seemed quieter here. After a time, Caroline spoke again. "You lived up here alone for years. How did you manage the loneliness?" John kept his eyes on the trail. Loneliness is lighter when a man chooses it. Mine wasn't chosen. It just became the only path left. Did it ever feel bearable? Not really. I softened it with routine. Chopped wood, rode the land, fixed what needed fixin', left the rest untouched. Caroline folded her hands together. I know that kind of silence, the kind that presses on your chest. He glanced toward her. I had a feelin' you did. The wagon rolled between two large pines. The forest opened into a wider view, revealing the valley stretching toward Dry Creek. Smoke rose from distant chimneys. The faint sound of a church bell drifted through the cold air. Caroline tensed. John noticed. You don't need to fear the sight of it. It's just a town. No, she said. It's not. Not for me. He guided the reins gently. Tell me what Dry Creek meant to you before all this. She took a deep breath. It was where my husband and I lived. We had a small house near the mill. Nothing grand. Just a place that felt ours. He worked long hours, but he always came home. Every evening, he'd light a lamp before I stepped through the door. Said it was his way of keeping the dark from following me in. Her voice thinned. The night he died, that lamp wasn't burning. John slowed the horse. His posture shifted with a depth of understanding she did not expect. Caroline, he said quietly. Who killed him? Her fingers tightened around the blanket in her lap. Elias Ward. He disguised it as an accident. Told me my husband slipped behind the feed store. But I found the marks on his coat. I found the bruises. John's jaw tightened, and Mason protected him. He told me to stop asking questions. The wagon rolled onward through the narrow pass. A ridge of rocks lined the right side of the trail like a wall. John steered the horse carefully, watching the path ahead. You've carried that truth alone for a long time, he said. It hollowed me, she whispered. Not anymore, he replied. A long stretch of quiet followed, not heavy, but contemplative, the kind born between two people who had begun to see themselves inside each other's wounds. Eventually, John pulled the horse to a slow halt beneath a stand of tall spruce. This is where we leave the main road. Caroline sat forward slightly. Where does it go? A back trail. Folks in town don't use it. Too rocky for a wagon unless you know how to guide it. He eased the horse into a new direction. The wagon creaked as it moved between thick clusters of spruce branches. Snow dropped lightly from the higher limbs, creating delicate bursts of white as they passed. Caroline studied him as he navigated the narrow trail. His focus was unwavering. His hands moved with instinct, each pull of the reins precise. She admired the strength in his posture, the steadiness in his breathing. Something inside her warmed unexpectedly. You never asked me what I want, she said softly. What do you want? He replied. She hesitated. Justice, but peace too. I'm not sure which one I want more. You get justice first, John said. Peace follows after. I don't know if peace exists for people like me. It does, he said, but it doesn't meet you halfway. You meet it. Caroline held his words close. Something in them steadied her heart. Ahead, the trees parted enough to reveal a faint outline of Dry Creek. The rooftops gleamed with a dusting of snow. Caroline felt her pulse rise. John pulled the horse to a stop behind a cluster of thick brush. We walk from here. Caroline shook her head. I can't walk that far. I'll carry you, John said. You'll hurt yourself. Let me decide what I can handle. The firmness in his voice softened her hesitation. He stepped into the back of the wagon and lifted her in his arms. She curled into him, the cold air pressing against her face while his warmth sheltered her. Her voice trembled. "John, if we don't make it out, we will. You don't know that." His grip tightened. "I know enough to trust the path we're on." He carried her through the brush, moving with careful steps, each footfall placed with deliberate control. Caroline nestled closer, her fears easing under the steady rhythm of his stride. The outskirts of Dry Creek loomed ahead. A single lantern burned near the old feed mill. A cold fist of dread clenched inside her. But John's voice anchored her. "You're not alone," he murmured. "Not anymore." Caroline closed her eyes briefly, holding on to the truth in those words. They stepped beyond the tree line together. The back edge of Dry Creek felt different than Caroline remembered. The buildings she once passed every day seemed hollowed by distance and time. Silence clung to the narrow alley behind the feed mill. Only the single lantern near the doorway flickered, stretching long shapes across the ground. John Calder carried her close, his steps steady though his breath deepened with the effort. When he reached a stack of old crates, he lowered her gently to sit upon one. Her fingers clung lightly to his coat until she steadied herself. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Caroline nodded. "I can manage." He searched her expression. "We don't move forward if you're not strong enough. I won't slow you down." John exhaled through his nose, accepting her resolve even if he did not like it. "We move fast once we're inside. The back office should be locked. That drawer Mason uses for private papers is on the right side of the room, near a window with a crooked hinge." Caroline pictured the room from memory. "The key is small. Brass. He keeps it on a ring he hides under the ledger he uses for show. The real ledger was the one I saw Elias hand him." John nodded once. "Stay hidden until I signal." Before she could respond, the sound of boots approached from the street. Heavy steps, voices muffled. A man laughed, the sound scraping through the quiet. Caroline's breath tightened. John leaned closer, his presence shielding her from sight. "Don't be afraid." "I'm not afraid," she whispered, though her heartbeat betrayed her. "I'm remembering." "What are you remembering?" "The last time I heard Elias laugh." John stilled. "Tell me." She spoke slowly, letting the memory rise from the place she had buried it. "After my husband died, I walked past the sheriff's office. Elias was inside, laughing. Not grief, not sympathy, laughing." Her voice thinned. "That's when I knew the accident wasn't an accident." John's eyes darkened. "I won't let him hurt you again." Caroline looked up at him, her voice nearly a breath. "I believe you." The boots passed, their echoes faded. John scanned the alley again, then helped her stand. "We can go," he said. "Stay close." They moved along the narrow walkway behind the county building. The wall loomed tall and gray, its wooden boards swollen slightly from winter damp. The back door was marked with a faint scrape near the handle, a mark John remembered from years ago. He pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing inside. He pulled a thin piece of iron from his coat pocket. Caroline whispered. "Surprised? You know how to pick the lock. I know many things I don't often talk about." The lock clicked after only a few seconds. John eased the door open, holding it with his shoulder to prevent creaking. Caroline slipped in. The room was dim, lit only by the faintest wash of moonlight through the window. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with paper boxes and stamped files. The air smelled of old paper and dust. John closed the door behind them and guided her to a small bench. "Sit. Rest. Let me find it. I should help. You already are." His voice left no room for argument. Caroline watched him move through the shadowed office. He navigated the narrow space with familiarity, opening a drawer here, checking a shelf there. He paused at the desk near the crooked window. "This is where he keeps what matters," John whispered. He sifted through papers. Bills, land claims, receipts, nothing that looked dangerous. Caroline's pulse raced. "Try the drawer beneath." John tugged the handle. It didn't budge. "Locked." "That's the one," she said. John pulled a second tool from his pocket, thinner than the first. His hands moved with patience, listening for the tiny shift inside the mechanism. A click snapped through the quiet. John slid the drawer open. Inside lay the brass key. Caroline felt her chest tighten. "That's it." John placed the key in her hand. The metal felt colder than she expected, as if holding the echo of every wrong tied to it. John reached back into the drawer and lifted a small ledger wrapped in a piece of cloth. When he unwrapped it, they saw the dark leather cover, worn at the edges. Caroline felt the breath leave her. "That's the real one." John flipped through the pages, the inked names, the amounts, the dates. Each entry tied someone in Dry Creek to a truth they had hoped would stay buried. He closed the ledger carefully. "This is enough to put Mason and Elias exactly where they belong." Caroline's voice trembled. "John, they'll kill us if they know we have it. That's why we don't give them the chance." A sound broke the silence. Boots on the porch outside the office. John froze. Caroline's breath hitched. The footsteps were slow, controlled, familiar. Mason Harlow's voice carried through the door. This building shouldn't be unlocked. Caroline's heart slammed against her ribs. John moved swiftly, pulling her toward the small storage closet near the far wall. "Stay behind me." "No," she whispered. "They're after me. Let me distract them." John turned sharply. His voice dropped to a tone that cut through fear. "Caroline, I didn't bring you into this town to let you walk into danger. You stay behind me." His hand lingered on her cheek just long enough for her to feel its warmth before he stepped into position near the desk. The door creaked open. Mason entered first, lantern raised beside his head. Elias Ward followed close behind. Both men froze at the sight of John standing calmly inside the office. "Well," Mason said slowly, "this is surprising." John didn't move. "You left your door unlocked." "I doubt that." Elias crossed his arms, a smirk pulling at his lips. "Didn't picture you for someone who sneaks around offices at night. Didn't picture you for a man who kills unarmed folk," John replied. Elias's smile faded. Mason stepped further inside. "This is a mistake. John, walk out of here and forget whatever you think you know." John's posture didn't shift. "The days of forgetting ended for me a long time ago." Elias' gaze slid toward the storage closet. "You alone." John didn't answer. Mason noticed the open drawer. "Looking for something. Found what I needed." Mason's jaw tensed. "Where is she? You'll never touch her again." Elias reached for his gun. John drew faster. The lantern light trembled, flickering wildly as the tension thickened enough to feel. No one moved. No one breathed. Caroline, hidden in the small closet, pressed a hand against her chest, trying to quiet her heartbeat. She could hear every sound outside. The faint rustle of John adjusting his stance, Mason's slow, poisoned breath, the distant creak of a sign outside shifting in the wind. She closed her eyes, not from fear, from resolve. She knew the time for silence was over. She pushed the door open, stepping into the room. John hissed, "Caroline." No. But she moved forward anyway, her voice steady though her body trembled. "Mason," she said. "I'm right here." Both men turned toward her. A twisted smile spread across Mason's face. "Well, the missing widow returns." Caroline stepped closer to John. "I didn't hide from you. I escaped you." Elias's eyes darkened. "You should have stayed gone." "No," she replied firmly. "I should have spoken sooner." Her voice carried through the room like the first crack of ice before a river breaks. John stood ready beside her. His presence alone felt like a shield. Mason's expression shifted from mockery to calculation, then to anger. "You two have made a very foolish choice tonight." John lifted the ledger. "This is what's going to end you, Mason." For the first time, the sheriff's mask slipped. Panic flickered behind his eyes. A sound echoed outside. A horse. Several horses. Then a voice carried through the doorway. Thomas Grady. "John, you need to come out now." The entire room tensed. The story was no longer quiet. Everything was about to break. The doorway filled with Thomas Grady's shape before the lantern light settled. His eyes swept the office and landed on the ledger in John's hand. A muscle twitched along his jaw. "John," he said with a gravity that spoke of consequences waiting outside, "you're surrounded." Caroline stiffened, an instinctive fear rising like a tide. John shifted just enough to shield her from view. "What's waiting out there?" he asked. "Half the men in town," Thomas replied. "Mason told them you came to stir trouble. He said you were the one who broke into his home yesterday. He said you're armed and dangerous." John held Thomas's gaze without blinking. "You know that's a lie." Thomas hesitated. "I do, but some of those men outside don't care what's true. They trust the sheriff." Mason smirked, confidence returning like a stain bleeding back into cloth. "This ends right now." John lifted the ledger slightly. "It ends. But not for me." Thomas stepped fully inside, closing the door behind him with quiet deliberation. "Give me the book." "John, I'll take it to the judge myself. I'll swear on what's inside," Mason snapped, voice cracking. "You hand him that book and you bury this town." "No," John answered. "I dig it out." Before Mason could speak again, Caroline moved from behind John's shoulder. Her voice was calm, though her fingers trembled. "Thomas, you knew my husband. You knew the kind of man Robert was. Tell me, do you believe he drowned by accident?" Thomas swallowed hard. "No, I've never believed that." Caroline breathed through the heaviness swelling in her chest. "Then don't ask us to hand back the only truth we've got." Thomas looked between her and John. His expression carried conflict, duty fighting against conscience. "You two walk out that door," he said, "and you'll have rifles trained on you from every direction." John answered with the certainty of a man who had already accepted whatever came next. "Then we walk, anyway." Caroline felt the quiet inside her settle. Not like fear, but like acceptance. "We walk together." Elias Ward scoffed. "You're not leaving this building with that ledger." John turned toward him with a stare as steady as winter stone. "You ready to try stopping me?" Something in John's voice made even Mason glance toward his deputy with hesitation. Thomas raised both hands. "Enough. Nobody's dying tonight if I have something to say about it." He stepped toward John. "Give me the ledger. I'll take it. I'll protect it." John didn't move. Caroline touched his arm gently. "Look at him. He's trying to choose the right side. Let him." John turned his face slightly toward her, and in that small angle, she sensed him weighing her words more heavily than anything else in the room. After a long pause, he placed the ledger in Thomas's hands. Thomas exhaled with visible relief. "I'll bring this to Judge Marin. He's honest, old damn mule of a man, but honest." John nodded once. "Ride fast." Thomas opened the door and stepped outside. Shouts rose, boots thudded, questions flew. But Thomas didn't stop. His voice carried above the noise. "Make way. Official business." The crowd resisted at first, but Thomas's tone sharpened, cutting through doubt. After that, horses moved, men parted, and the sound of hooves faded into the distance. Inside the office, Tension thinned but didn't lift. Mason's glare could have carved stone. That book isn't going to save you. You think the judge will believe a drifter and a widow over the sheriff. He'll believe the numbers. John answered. He'll believe the handwriting. Elias's hand hovered near his gun. You're both making a mistake. Caroline looked at him, her voice subdued yet steady. Every mistake has a beginning. Yours began the night you pushed my husband into that river. Elias froze. You don't know what you're talking about. She held his gaze with a quiet strength that carried more weight than shouting. I know a guilty man when I hear him breathe. Elias looked away sharply. John guided Caroline toward the door. We're leaving. Mason stepped in front of them. You won't get far. John's reply was soft. Watch us. Caroline felt John's fingers curve around hers, grounding her as they stepped outside. The gathered townsfolk stared, uncertain, shifting between belief and doubt. Some whispered, others kept their hands near their holsters, but no one fired. Maybe it was the way John walked, slow and steady, a man who did not fear judgment. Maybe it was the way Caroline stood beside him, calm and unbroken after months of hiding, or maybe it was the lantern light catching the bruises on her skin and the truth in her eyes. Whatever it was, people stepped aside. John helped her onto the horse, then mounted behind her. He wrapped an arm around her waist, both for balance and protection. The town watched them leave without interference. Mason yelled commands, no one followed. Elias shouted a warning lost in the wind. Dry Creek didn't move to stop them. Not anymore. They reached the open land beyond the last house, the sky wide and deep above them. Only when the town shrank behind them did Caroline finally breathe freely. John slowed the horse to a gentle pace. You did brave work in there. So did you. He let silence rest between them. Not the heavy kind. The kind that allows two tired souls to settle in the truth they've earned. By the time they reached John's cabin in Silver Ridge, a faint glow burned through the windows. John dismounted carefully and helped her down. The warmth inside greeted them like an old friend. Caroline eased into a chair while John stoked the fire. You need rest, he said. I will. But first, tell me what comes next. He paused with the poker in his hand. Judge Marin will read that ledger. There will be hearings, questions, and Mason will have to answer every one. And Elias. He won't escape either. Caroline looked into the fire. It's strange. I thought justice would feel like fire, but it feels more like air. John sat beside her. You can breathe again. She nodded once, her eyes softening. For the first time in a long while, the quiet stretched between them, warm and unhurried. The cabin creaked lightly in the cool wind. The fire cracked. Caroline leaned her head against the back of the chair, letting peace settle in places that had been hollow. After a moment, John spoke quietly. You know you can stay here, for as long as you want. Caroline turned her head toward him. Are you asking from duty or something else? John's breath caught in his chest. He looked into the fire before speaking. I'm asking because when I found you out there in the dust, bleeding and afraid, something in me woke up, something I thought died a long time ago. You walked into this cabin with more grief than most folks carry in a lifetime, and you still found a way to stand tall. You brought quiet back into this place. Not the lonely kind, the kind a man can live in. Her eyes softened. John, he continued, voice low. I'm not asking you to choose anything tonight. Healing is slow work, but if you ever want a place that feels like more than survival, this cabin is yours as much as mine. Caroline felt a warmth rise through her chest, gentle and steady. The kind of warmth that doesn't rush or demand. I don't know what I'm ready for, she whispered. But I know this is the first place where I've felt safe." John nodded, respecting the uncertainty without retreating from it. "That's enough," he said. "For now, that's enough." Caroline looked around the room, the fire's glow catching on the unfinished wood and the soft shadows that shaped the space. She pictured mornings marked by quiet conversation, evenings settled in shared silence, days shaped not by fear, but by choice, not certainty. Choice. For someone who had lived in the shadow of another man's violence, that alone felt like a kind of rebirth. She closed her eyes, allowing the comfort to wash over her like a slow tide. When she opened them again, John was watching her calmly, his expression tender in a way she hadn't seen before. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For being here." John's voice softened. "That's why I'm here." The firelight flickered across their faces, and for the first time since her husband's death, Caroline felt the future reach for her gently, without force or fear. Outside, the land stretched wide and open. Inside, the quiet deepened into something warm, not the silence of isolation, the silence of healing, the kind that makes a home. John and Caroline's story reminds us that no one gets through life unscathed. It's not how we fall that matters, but how we get back up, and who we allow to walk the rest of our journey with us. In our 60s and beyond, many people experience loss, loneliness, silences that last longer than the night. But it's those moments that teach us that tenderness never comes too late. Trust never fails, and the heart can still find its own sanctuary. The most beautiful thing in this story is not the ending, but the choices. Choosing to open your heart even though it hurts, choosing to give chances even though you are afraid, choosing to love even though life is full of storms. And sometimes, just one simple sentence is enough to change someone's life. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. Hopefully, John and Caroline's journey has brought you a little warmth, a little faith, and a little peace of mind. If the story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that we have more motivation to bring more meaningful content. Thank you very much.